A baby sister for Frances. It was a quiet evening. Father was reading his newspaper. Mother was feeding Gloria, the new baby. Frances was sitting under the kitchen sink. She was singing a little song. Plinkety, 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 plink. Here is a dish rag that's under the sink. Here are the buckets and brushes and me. Plinkety, 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 plee. She stopped the song and listened. Nobody said anything. Frances went to her room and took out some gravel from the drawer where she had been saving it. She put the gravel into her empty coffee can and put the lid back on the can. Frances marched into the living room and rattled the gravel in the can, and as she marched she sang a marching song. Here we go marching, rattly bang. Please don't do that, Frances, said Father. Frances stopped. All right, she said. She went back to the kitchen and sat down under the sink. Mother came in, carrying Gloria. Why are you sitting under the sink? Said Mother. I like it here, said Frances. It's cozy. Would you like to help me put Gloria to bed? Said Mother. How much allowance does Gloria get? Said Frances. She is too little to have an allowance, said Father. Only big girls like you get allowances. Isn't it nice to be a big sister? May I have a penny along with my nickel now that I am a big sister? Said Frances. Yes, said Father. Now your allowance will be 6 cents a week because you are a big sister. Thank you, said Frances. I know a girl who gets 17 cents a week. She gets 3 nickels and 2 pennies. Well, said Father, it's time for bed now. Father picked up Frances from under the sink and gave her a piggyback ride to bed. Mother and Father tucked her in and kissed her good night. I need my tiny special blanket, said Frances. Mother gave her the tiny special blanket. And I need my tricycle and my sled, and both teddy bears and my alligator doll, said Frances. Father brought in the tricycle and the sled, and both teddy bears and the alligator doll. Mother and Father kissed her good night again, and Frances went to sleep. In the morning, Frances got up and washed and began to dress for school. Is my blue dress ready for me to wear? Said Frances. Oh dear, said Mother. I was so busy with Gloria that I did not have time to iron it, so you'll have to wear the yellow one. Mother buttoned Frances up the back. Then she brushed her hair and put a new ribbon in it and put her breakfast on the table. Why did you put sliced bananas on the oatmeal? Said Frances. Did you forget that I like raisins? No, I did not forget, said Mother, but you finished up the raisins yesterday, and I have not been out shopping yet. Well, said Frances, things are not very good around here any more. No clothes to wear, no raisins for the oatmeal. I think maybe I'll run away. Finish your breakfast, said Mother. It is almost time for the school bus. What time will dinner be tonight? Said Frances. 6:30, said Mother. Then I will have plenty of time to run away after dinner, said Frances, and she kissed her mother good-bye and went to school. After dinner that evening, Frances packed her little knapsack very carefully. She put in her tiny special blanket and her alligator doll. She took all of the nickels and pennies out of her bank for travel money, and she took her good luck coin for good luck. Then she took a box of prunes from the kitchen and 5 chocolate sandwich cookies. Well, said Frances, it is time to say goodbye. I am on my way. Goodbye. Where are you running away to? Said Father. I think that under the dining room table is the best place, said Frances. It's cozy, and the kitchen is near if I run out of cookies. That is a good place to run away to, said Mother, but I'll miss you. I'll miss you too, said Father. Well, said Frances, goodbye, and she ran away. Father sat down with his newspaper. Mother took up the sweater she was knitting. Father put down the newspaper. You know, he said, it is not the same house without Frances. That is just exactly what I was thinking, said Mother. The place seems lonesome and empty without her." Frances sat under the dining room table and ate her prunes. "Even Gloria," said Mother, "as small as she is, can feel the difference." "I can hear her crying a little right now," said Father. "Well," said Mother, "a girl looks up to an older sister. You know that." Father picked up his newspaper. Then he put it down again. "I miss the songs that Frances used to sing," he said. "I was so fond of those little songs," said Mother. "Do you remember the one about the tomato?" "What does the tomato say early in the dawn?" said Mother. "Time to be all red again, now that night is gone," sang Father. "Yes," he said, "that is a good one, but my favorite has always been, 'When the wasps and the bumblebees have a party, nobody comes that can't buzz.'" "Well," said Mother, "we shall just have to get used to a quiet house now." Frances ate 3 of the sandwich cookies and put the other 2 aside for later. She began to sing, "I am poor and hungry here, eating prunes and rice. Living all alone is not really nice." She had no rice, but chocolate sandwich cookies did not sound right for the song. "I can almost hear her now," said Father, humming the tune that Frances had just sung. "She has a charming voice." "It is just not a family without Frances," said Mother. "Babies are very nice. Goodness knows I like babies. But a baby is not a family." "Isn't that a fact?" said Father. "A family is everybody all together." "Remember," said Mother, "how I used to say, 'Think how lucky the new baby will be to have a sister like Frances'?" "I remember that very well," said Father, "and I hope that Gloria turns out to be as clever and good as Frances." "With a big sister like Frances to help her along, she ought to turn out just fine," said Mother. "I'd like to hear from Frances," said Father, "just to know how she is getting along in her new place." "I'd like to hear from Frances too," said Mother, "and I'm not sure the sleeves are right on this sweater I'm knitting for her." "Hello!" called Frances from the dining room. "I am calling on the telephone. Hello, hello, this is me. Is that you?" "Hello," said Mother, "this is us. How are you?" "I'm fine," said Frances. "This is a nice place. But you miss your family when you're away. How are you?" "We are all well," said Father, "but we miss you too." "I will be home soon," said Frances, and she hung up. "She said that she will be home soon," said Father. "That is good news indeed," said Mother. "I think I'll bake a cake." Frances put on her knapsack and sang a little traveling song. "Big sisters really have to stay at home and not travel far away, because everybody misses them and wants to hug and kisses them." "I'm not sure about that last rhyme," said Frances as she arrived in the living room and took off her knapsack. "That's a good enough rhyme," said Father. "I like it fine," said Mother, and they both hugged and kissed her. "What kind of cake are you baking?" said Frances to Mother. "Chocolate," said Mother. "It's too bad that Gloria's too little to have some," said Frances. "But when she's a big girl like me, she can have chocolate cake too." "Oh, yes," said Mother. "You may be sure that there will always be plenty of chocolate cake around here." The end. Mercy Watson Goes for a Ride. Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson have a pig named Mercy. Every Saturday, Mrs. Watson makes a special lunch. "Time for our little Saturday something," Mrs. Watson says. "You've outdone yourself, Mrs. Watson," Mr. Watson says. "Oink," says Mercy. Every Saturday after lunch, Mr. Watson goes outside. Mercy follows him. They stand in the driveway. Together they admire Mr. Watson's convertible. "Are you ready?" asks Mr. Watson. "Oink," says Mercy. Mr. Watson opens the passenger door. Mercy hops into the car. She sits behind the wheel. She snuffles contentedly. "He, he, he," says Mr. Watson every Saturday. "You, my dear, are a porcine wonder, but even porcine wonders cannot drive cars." Mr. Watson gently pushes Mercy toward the passenger seat, but Mercy does not move. She does not want to sit in the passenger seat. Mercy Watson wants to drive. "He, he, he," says Mr. Watson again. He pushes less gently. "Scoot over, my dear." Mercy does not move. "Help me!" Mr. Watson calls out. Every Saturday Mrs. Watson steps outside. "Darling," Mrs. Watson says, "if you let Mr. Watson drive, I will make you an extra helping of hot buttered toast. I will have it waiting for you when you get home." Mercy narrows her eyes. She loves hot buttered toast. She also loves extra helpings. Slowly, very slowly, she moves over to the passenger side. "What a dear!" says Mrs. Watson. She claps her hands. "You are such a good sport, darling." "Yes," says Mr. Watson, "she most certainly is." He gets in the car and sits behind the wheel. He turns the key in the ignition. The Watson convertible rumbles to life. "Bon voyage!" Mrs. Watson calls. "Bon voyage, my dears. When you get home we will all have hot buttered toast." "Goodbye, Mrs. Watson," Mr. Watson shouts. He backs the car out of the driveway very quickly. He does not look behind him. Mr. Watson is a forward-looking man. He does not believe in looking back. "Oink!" says Mercy. Already she is having a good time. "And we're off," says Mr. Watson. "We're off on an adventure." Eugenia Lincoln and Baby Lincoln live next door to the Watsons. Every Saturday, the Lincoln sisters watch Mercy and Mr. Watson back out of the driveway. Every Saturday, Eugenia is displeased. "Mr. Watson is a very bad driver," she says. "He is a menace behind the wheel." "Yes, sister," says Baby. "Furthermore," says Eugenia, "it is my firm opinion that pigs should not be taken for rides in automobiles. Particularly that pig. That pig is a sly pig. I do not trust her." "No, sister," says Baby. Baby looks down the road. The car has disappeared. Mr. Watson and Mercy are gone. "Folly!" says Eugenia Lincoln. She shakes her fist. "It is folly, I say." "Yes, sister," says Baby. But secretly, Baby Lincoln thinks that a little folly wouldn't be a bad thing. One Saturday, Mrs. Watson made a special lunch. After lunch, Mr. Watson and Mercy went outside. Everything happened just as it always did every Saturday on Deckawoo Drive. "What folly!" said Eugenia Lincoln as usual. "What nonsense!" She paused. Eugenia waited for Baby to say, "Yes, sister." But Baby said nothing. Baby said nothing because Baby was not there. Officer Tamilio sat in his police cruiser. A pink convertible sped past him. "Was that a pig?" Officer Tamilio asked. "Yes, it was," he answered himself. "That most certainly was a pig." "Is it illegal to take a pig for a ride?" Officer Tamilio asked himself. "I don't believe it is," he answered himself. "It is unusual," he continued, "but unusual does not equal illegal. However, it is illegal to speed, and that vehicle was definitely speeding." Officer Tamilio turned on his flashing lights. He pulled out onto the highway. He followed the car with the pig in it. In the car with the pig in it, the pig was having a very good time. The wind was tickling her ears. The sun was warm on her snout. Even though she was not the one behind the wheel, Mercy was happy. Mr. Watson was happy too. "There's nothing like a fast drive to clear the mind," he shouted. "Isn't that right, my dear?" "Oink!" said Mercy. "It is wonderful to go fast," said a voice from the back seat. "Who said that?" said Mr. Watson. "Me," said Baby Lincoln. Mr. Watson looked over his shoulder. "Hello, Mr. Watson," said Baby. Oink, said Mercy. Hello, Mercy, said Baby. What are you doing? Shouted Mr. Watson. I am having a little adventure, said Baby. I am indulging in a little folly. Folly? Said Mr. Watson. Mercy narrowed her eyes. Mr. Watson was looking over his shoulder at Baby. He was not looking at the road. Mercy saw her chance. She gathered her strength. She leaped. Help! Mr. Watson said. Help me! Woo-wee, said Baby Lincoln. What folly! What fun! What adventure! Please, said Mr. Watson, get off me. He pushed at Mercy with both hands. But Mercy did not move. She put her front hooves on the steering wheel. She was in the driver's seat, and she intended to stay there. Back on Deckerwood Drive, Eugenia Lincoln was looking for Baby. She looked in Baby's bed. Baby was not there. She looked on the back step. Baby was not there either. Baby, shouted Eugenia, reveal yourself at once. But Baby did not reveal herself. Where could she be? Said Eugenia, and why do I think this has something to do with that pig? Eugenia marched next door. She rang the Watsons' bell. Mrs. Watson, said Eugenia, Baby is missing. Goodness, said Mrs. Watson, and I believe that your pig is responsible, said Eugenia. Mercy? Said Mrs. Watson. Yes, said Eugenia, exactly. But Mercy is not here, said Mrs. Watson. She is on her Saturday ride with Mr. Watson. Eugenia turned and looked down the road. Folly, she said. Heavens, said Mrs. Watson, you don't think. I do think, said Eugenia. That is my point exactly. I do think. And apparently I am the only one around here who does. Officer Tamilio had to go very fast to catch up with the convertible. The officer had to speed. Is that vehicle swerving? Officer Tamilio asked himself. It is, he answered himself. It is most definitely swerving. Is the driver of that vehicle breaking the law? Officer Tamilio asked. Without a doubt, he answered. The law is being broken. It is time to take action. Officer Tamilio pulled up alongside the car. He shouted into his bullhorn, Pull over! The driver turned. The driver looked at him. The driver oinked. Is that a pig behind the wheel? Officer Tamilio asked himself. Yes, he answered himself. Yes, that pig is most definitely behind the wheel. Again, Officer Tamilio shouted into his bullhorn, Pull over! Pigs cannot drive cars. Pull over immediately. He is absolutely correct, said Mr. Watson. Pigs cannot drive cars, and I would like to pull over, but I can no longer feel my legs. Therefore, I cannot step on the brake pedal. Therefore, I cannot stop this car. Oh dear, said Baby, I think we are in trouble. Back on Deckerwood Drive, Mrs. Watson invited Eugenia inside. There's no point in worrying alone, Mrs. Watson said. Come in and help me fix a snack for my darlings. Mrs. Watson brought Eugenia into the kitchen. Will you help me butter some toast? Asked Mrs. Watson. Toast? Grumbled Eugenia. Who cares about toast? Don't worry, said Mrs. Watson. She patted Eugenia on the back. If Baby is with Mr. Watson, then she is just fine. Mr. Watson is an excellent driver. He is a menace, said Eugenia. Pardon? Said Mrs. Watson. Nothing, said Eugenia. She picked up a piece of toast. She applied the tiniest amount of butter. Oh, heavens, said Mrs. Watson. You have to put on more than that. Mercy likes a great deal of butter on her toast. Who cares how pigs like their toast? Eugenia said. There, said Mrs. Watson. I know that you are worried, but everything will work out. Baby will come home. In the meantime, why don't we just concentrate on our buttering? Toast is not the answer, grumbled Eugenia, but she buttered another piece anyway. You must stop the car, shouted Officer Tamilio. But I cannot stop the car, said Mr. Watson. Oink, oink, said Mercy. She was having an excellent time. I have an idea, Mr. Watson, said Baby. If you tell me where the brake pedal is, I will apply it. The brake pedal, said Mr. Watson from underneath Mercy, is the pedal to the left of the gas pedal. The brake pedal is the pedal that I do not have my foot on. Baby unbuckled her seat belt. She climbed into the front seat. She put her seat belt on. She slid as close to Mr. Watson as she could. She looked down. She saw Mr. Watson's foot. She saw the pedal next to it. I have located the brake pedal, Mr. Watson, Baby announced. Excellent, said Mr. Watson. Now apply it. Baby stretched across Mr. Watson. I am applying the brake pedal, Mr. Watson, Baby shouted. Hold on, everyone. The car screeched. The car shuddered. The car careened. The car caromed. And finally, the car stopped. Mercy was very surprised. Suddenly, she was not driving the car. Suddenly, she was not even in the car. Suddenly, Mercy was airborne. Mr. Watson was wearing his seat belt. He did not fly out of the car. Baby Lincoln was wearing her seat belt. She did not fly out of the car. Officer Tamilio was safe in his police cruiser. He did not fly out of his car. Only Mercy flew. Oh dear, said Baby. It's an emergency, shouted Mr. Watson. Alert the fire department. Was that pig wearing a seat belt? Officer Tamilio asked. No, he answered himself. That pig most certainly was not. Have laws been broken here? Asked Officer Tamilio. Most certainly, most definitely, laws have been broken here. Mr. Watson and Baby Lincoln and Officer Tamilio watched Mercy fly. They watched her land. Ooh, oof! Mr. Watson got out of the car. He ran to Mercy. He wrapped his arms around her and held her tight. My darling, my dear, he said, please tell me that you are all right. Oink, said Mercy. She snuffled Mr. Watson's neck. Hooray, said Baby. She is fine. Oh, thank you, said Mr. Watson. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He bent his head and covered the tips of Mercy's ears with kisses. You are a miracle, a prodigy, a dear, said Mr. Watson. You are a porcine wonder, but even porcine wonders cannot drive. In fact, porcine wonders should never be allowed to drive, ever. Mercy sighed. She was glad the ride was over. She felt a tiny bit dizzy, and a little bit dazed. She wanted very much to go home. Eugenia Lincoln and Mrs. Watson stood together on the Watsons' front porch. They watched a police car pull into the driveway. Mr. Watson and Mercy and Baby Lincoln were all in the back seat. As I suspected, said Eugenia. Trouble, folly, and that pig is right in the middle of it. Oh, said Mrs. Watson, my darlings, my dears. She ran out to the police car. I am so glad that you are home. The toast was starting to get cold. Mr. Watson and Baby Lincoln got out of the car. We have had something of an adventure, Mrs. Watson, Mr. Watson said. Yes, said Baby, we have had an adventure, sister. Folly, replied Eugenia Lincoln. Yes, agreed Baby Lincoln happily. Folly. Laws have been broken, said Officer Tamilio. Pig! Shouted Eugenia. Excuse me? Said Officer Tamilio. It's all the pig's fault, said Eugenia. She pointed at Mercy. Mercy climbed out of the car. She put her nose up in the air. She sniffed. Could it be? Yes, it was. Toast! Toast with a great deal of butter on it. What could be better? Laws have been broken, said Officer Tamilio. Tickets must be written. Officer, do you like toast? Mrs. Watson asked. Toast? said Officer Tamalio. Do I like toast? Why, yes, I do. I do like toast. Why don't you come inside and have some? Asked Mrs. Watson. Why don't I come inside and have some? Some toast? Asked Officer Tamalio. Hmm, said Officer Tamalio. I can't think of a reason not to. Lovely, said Mrs. Watson. She clapped her hands together. Right this way. What nonsense, grumbled Eugenia Lincoln. Toast is not the answer. No, sister, said baby Lincoln, but it does smell heavenly. She took hold of Eugenia's hand. Well, said Eugenia, it has been expertly buttered. And so, that Saturday, Officer Tamalio and Eugenia Lincoln and Baby Lincoln and Mr. and Mrs. Watson and Mercy Watson all sat around the table together and ate hot buttered toast. Did Mercy Watson have extra helpings? She did, and so did Officer Tamalio. The end. Good night, baby. I love you so much. Sweet dreams.